Good morning, and thank you for signing up for the Stump the Archivist webinar with Washington State Archives. We will be doing a similar webinar every month, so join us for future webinars too. No two webinars are going to be the same. Research Archivist Tracy Rebstock is our host, and she will be hosting all these Stump the Archivist webinars for the foreseeable future. This is primarily a Q&A session, which will start after Tracy does a little talk. After that, feel free to chime in with your questions or go ahead and put your questions in the comment section in the chat on the right. If you don't see the chat right now, you can click the little chat button that should be on the bottom right of your screen, and that will pop up the chat, and you can type your questions in there, and we'll read them for you. But again, feel free to just unmute yourself and chime in with a question. Without further ado, Tracy, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Jameson. So I am coming to you from our second floor in the stacks in the Archives building in Olympia, Washington. The Washington State Archives is a division under the Secretary of State's office, and we have 5 branches located throughout the state of Washington. So one in Cheney, one in Bellingham, one in Bellevue, one in Ellensburg, and then one here in Olympia. Did I forget somebody? I feel like I may have. No, I didn't. Okay. So today I was going to just start us off with a little talk about naturalization records. We get a lot of those questions when I work with researchers, and I thought I would just point out a couple of great resources to start and to talk a little bit about naturalization, because a lot of times people talk about want to know how naturalization or how the immigration process has been. Well, the thing is, it's changed over time. It changed quite a bit. But here in the state of Washington, a lot of our courts held records having to do with naturalization, sometimes part of the process or sometimes the whole event. Many of our naturalization records are digitized and are up on our digital archives. And I'm going to show that to you real quick just so you can see where they are. So I'm going to share my screen real quick so you can see that. So this is the digital archives main page. And I always tell people, if you're going to do a search on the digital archives, the best place to start is by searching by name, and make it as simple as possible. Type in the first name, type in the last name, and then you can just do a search, and that'll include anything that comes up over any collection. And then once you do that, you'll get directed to different collections. If you want to work specifically with naturalization records or to see what sorts of naturalization records we have, it's good to start with the collections. So if you click on the collections button, you'll get a list of all of the different collections that we have over here on the left-hand side. And then it'll show all the different titles within that collection. So for instance, if I'm going to select naturalization records, I'm going to click on that, and there's going to be a whole list over here. And you'll see a lot of different county collections along in here. And you can scroll through and see what all's included. You'll see the date ranges vary greatly. So for some, there are, for instance, the Supreme Court clerk has some naturalization records in its collection. It's from 1855 to 1896. And you compare that with maybe someone like Clark County, which has collections that go maybe up into the 1960s or the 1950s, or like Asotin County has some petitions that go up to 1974. So it runs the gamut as far as what they cover. And of course, this is only part of the records that we hold in our collections for naturalizations. Back when they did the project, they did a lot of the things that were easier to image. So if they were in bound volumes, it was harder to get at the time with the technology to do great imaging of the bound volumes. So they left a lot of the bound volumes alone. And some of that we've been trying to go back and do that process a little bit more. But this is a really great place to look for those things. And if you know where your person may have naturalized, the other possibility is maybe your person didn't naturalize all the way in Washington, but maybe they started their process here and then they picked it up in another state, or they started in another state but then picked it up in Washington. And so we often, at many of our branches, have collections that include declarations of intent or certificates of arrival from other states within our collections. So just wanted to point that out a little bit. The other thing to mention is that it was 1906 when they kind of changed the law in a pretty major way. So prior to 1906, people could potentially get naturalized in a city clerk's office, in many different courts offices. There was just a lot of different places they could have gone. And so sometimes when you're looking for early naturalizations, you can find them in some different places. So like we saw here, the Supreme Court. Sometimes there could be an act of legislation during the territorial legislature that did it. We're always finding when we're helping people look for things, we're always finding records in places we didn't know to look. After about 1906, things began to start to get more regulated, although the law did change quite a bit over the years. But one of the big things is they started to wanted to do this at a federal level, but there was just so much happening that it was hard for them to do that. So here in Washington, the Superior Court clerk could process naturalizations up until the 70s and 80s, oftentimes working with the higher courts to get naturalizations done. So a lot of times people think, okay, first place to start is the National Archives. And I would say they're a great resource for naturalizations, depending on the time period and depending on where in the Pacific Northwest or the West you're looking. But it's also good to take a look here and then maybe check in with our branches to find out what else they may have to go with it. The other thing is naturalization law changed so much that sometimes a woman could have been a citizen, but if she married someone who was an immigrant, she may have lost her citizenship and then had to reapply. So many times you'll find applications for citizenships for people who were born in the United States, but they were married to someone who was not from this country originally. And then the same thing with children. Over time, children's naturalizations changed as well. Some of them were just automatically included when they were doing the paperwork, and then later, after a certain age, they would start. I think it was age of 14. I think it was in 1940, kids 14 and over would have to start filling out their own paperwork. They would get registered and fingerprinted when they would enter into the United States. So if you want to know more about some of our collections, I always point this out. This is our website, our landing page. If you want to do research, you can always select the Archives catalog, where you can hit keyword searching. And keep in mind, it's keyword searching. This is not a place to put names. It's rare that if you type a name in here, anything will actually come up unless your person was like held in office in the state of Washington, if they were on the legislature, if they were a governor, if they were a mayor, it's possible that that might happen. But otherwise, most of the time you're looking at things in terms of a keyword search. So for instance, if you wanted to look at what we had for naturalization, let me see if I can misspell things live and in person, right? And so you'll take a look and you'll see a list of all of the different types of naturalization records that we hold, and from all the different counties that we hold them. I will note that we do have counties where once a federal district court arrived on the scene, the county pretty much stopped doing naturalizations, because especially if their federal court was right next door, they would just say, oh, you're here for naturalization, go next door to the federal court. And that is the case for Spokane. Spokane County, I think there's not much in the Superior Court past 1912. So I'll just give a look. Now notice this gives literally everything we have throughout the state. If depending on where you're located in the state, you may want to narrow it down to your own county area. So you can do that at the top of the page once you're searching. I'm going to go back a page. And instead of choosing all the collections, let's say I live in Spokane And I'm curious about those, so I'm going to pick our eastern region and then search naturalization. And this will just limit the records that are located in our Eastern Regional Branch in Cheney. The other thing I always recommend people do is if you land on this catalog page and you're kind of like, there's a lot of choices, there's a lot of things happening. The way that we've arranged these records is by the agency that created them, which may not always be intuitive. So you can always press on this Ask an Archivist button. And I will apologize. I've heard that this has not been working as well lately, but we're trying to get that fixed and possibly in the process of getting that fixed. But usually that's a great place to start, or you can always contact us. And you can just grab any of our branches. If you want to start here at our main branch, you can go here and it'll give you a listing of what we hold, give our hours, how to email us. And you can literally email us about any type of question you may have, and we'll try to get you connected to the right place.
Just real quick, the Ask an Archivist button, it just works differently temporarily. So right now, if you click on the Ask an Archivist button, it'll take you to a web page with a bunch of email addresses for the different branches of the archives.
Perfect. Okay. Sounds great. I like it. At least it does. At least it doesn't send you into a void. For a while, I think it was sending people just into nowhere. So
Yeah,
we've been
people would
having
fill out
some.
the form and it would just go nowhere. Right.
Right. Yeah. So good to know that that's changed. Thank you, Jameson. All right, I'm going to quit sharing my screen and go back to the main page here. All right. So, okay. All right. So I am going to open this up for questions. Jameson's going to help me out. So you can either chat, you can put your question in the chat and Jameson will read those out to me, or if you just want to unmute yourself and ask me your question, either way will work, and we'll see where this goes. It doesn't have to be about naturalization. Oh, I wanted to give you a little show and tell. So I did bring a couple little things. Hopefully you can see. So this is an example of some naturalization cards. It's an index, and it's a little box that's got a little like recipe box type look to it, and they're in alphabetical order. This is everyone who is naturalized roughly from 1922 to 1970 in Lewis County. And then here is a sample of one of the declarations of intent volumes from Grays Harbor County. It's bound slightly differently with these giant staple type bar bindings, and inside there are declarations of intent. We do have a much larger volume that includes all of the documents together, regardless of size. And it's a little heavier for me to hold and show at this angle, but it's really cool. So if you ever come to visit us, we'll show you the cool volumes. All right, I'm ready. Oh, actually, I would just say, while I was talking, somebody brought me the first question. So, okay. Does the state archives have any of the territorial censuses that were done during the period before we were split from Oregon Territory in 1854? That's a good question. So most of our early censuses are available on the digital archives. And I'll pop back there real quick to show that. And then I will, so let me do that. Let's get back to here. The census records. So here's our census. So the earliest census records we have are on, and we do have early census before we split from Oregon, and that is the 1847 heads of family census from Lewis County, and then we have an 1850 Clark County census, an 1850 Lewis County census, and an 1851 Lewis County census. What's interesting about that is the 1874 so the 1847 heads of family census was collected in a different type of record. And so sometimes the early censuses are not, they don't scream census. They actually often are buried within perhaps another type of record where people were notating, land or notating a lot of other types of records. And so these are the ones we have. Many of the other censuses during the territorial period can be found with Oregon, or Oregon State Archives, or the Oregon Historical Society. And then sometimes they've made their way to the National Archives. But a lot of the local governments took their own censuses to kind of keep enumeration of who was around in the area. And it helped give information as far as like being able to get funding, being able to establish a post office, being able to create a county, be able to create a county seat, all that sort of information. So really good question. All right.
Great.
I'm
You ready
ready
for
for
the
the
next
next one.
question?
Yep.
Okay, our next question comes from one of our Lindas. She asks, how long after someone dies before we upload a death certificate or include death information on the archives, in the archives?
Good question. So currently the law for death records is we will be releasing, they'll be released from the Department of Health after 25 years. And that's what then we start putting those up. I think that you're able to look at death indexes slightly before then. And I think our death index only goes to 2017. And we are working with the Department of Health to get a more current spit out from their system. They're just trying to get things that are compatible so that we're able to upload it. And that would take us through 2021. Good question.
There are some, I don't know if this would be helpful information, but some cemetery information is available for more recent. If it's been, we have volunteers who go out to cemeteries and look at all the headstones and copy down the information, and we put that into the archives. But that's not exactly cumbersome of all cemeteries in the state of Washington. But there's a chance could be
Right.
on there.
Definitely. Between our cemetery indexing and Find a Graves cemetery indexing, sometimes you can find more recent deaths, both of those places.
Okay, the next question comes from Therese. She says, I'm looking for information about two relatives who died at Western State Hospital, one in 1907 and one in 1927.
Okay. And I guess I have a follow-up question. What kind of information are you looking for?
So I'd like to know, well, I'd really like to know why they were there. And then I'd like to know cause of death and just any kind of, it's just so intriguing to me that my great-great-grandfather and one of his daughters were both there and both passed away there.
Okay. So usually if you get the death certificate, it will give cause of death and give location of death. And that's probably going to be your best record for that. The records we hold for Western State Hospital beyond the admissions, we usually have an admissions log, but due to HIPAA laws and our state law, we're not allowed to release anything about diagnoses, right, on an index. So but we also have like annual reports about the state hospital. So a lot of people, what they'll do is instead of finding a record about their person, they'll say, hey, Tracy, do you have an annual report from 1907 from Western State Hospital that kind of talks about what they would have been and what it would have been like while they were there, right? What it would have been like. So if you want to shoot me an email, research@sos.wa.gov, and I'll have Jameson type that in, and you can always send us a request like that. So a lot of times, just because we can't give you information about their stay, we may be able to tell you something about the place they stayed, right? So.
I'm sorry, what was the web address you wanted me to put in?
Not the web address, our research email address.
Research email? Okay.
Yeah.
And sorry, just a quick follow-up. So those HIPAA applies forever. So even 120 years later, still can't find any more information.
So I think there's with birth records, I'll use birth records as a standard. So with birth records, 100 years after the birth, they are available. That is their standard. And so yes, at this moment in time, no one is comfortable releasing anything. It's been, long enough that, especially for 1907, that you might say that. But I think archivists get a little concerned without any law. That kind of helps give them that discernment. sometimes state archivists and repositories will decide at a certain point that maybe you've heard things like the 75-year rule or the or something like that, but maybe not all family members are in agreement with releasing. The other thing is, at this point in time, so we don't typically collect patient records. That's not usually a thing we would even have. Sometimes we have a sampling of patient records because they were showing what sorts of treatments were happening at that time, but not necessarily to the point of which I could go and pull someone's physical, this was their thing, right? And I will say archivists are pretty nervous about having access to those things for that reason, because we like to give you whatever we have most of the time, but we also understand why there could be reasons why people would not want that stuff released. So, all right. Next question.
Our next question is, let's see. What are some tips for researching parcels of land, especially finding maps and records of ownership?
So land research, I could probably do a whole day-long workshop on land research, but I'll try to give you the Crib Notes version. I'll try to give you the Crib Notes. Maybe that's something I'll talk a little bit about in our next one, and then maybe I'll come up with some handouts that could be helpful that we could distribute or something. But the biggest thing about land research is knowing what you want to know. So we have a guide here that was created by the City of Olympia's Historical Preservation Office that kind of gives you a really nice summary of this. Like if you're going to do any sort of land research, what kind of things you need to know and who usually has it. And that does change over time. So I always tell people, if you want to start with the largest part, you can go to the Bureau of Land Management's the glorecords.blm.gov, and you can look for the earliest surveys, or you can look for early land patents. I had a researcher contact me the other day because they wanted to trace land ownership of their particular property that they own right now. And so what you can do is take the information that you already have and then start tracing it back through time. And that does involve, like, sometimes when you buy your house, you get the title company will give you an entire sheaf of everybody who's owned your property through time. Sometimes they'll only give part of it, and then whatever's at the end of that will help you go further. But the grantor-grantee indexes that we hold for the counties are rather large, kind of cumbersome. Some of them have been digitized and they're available to peruse through online. They're not indexed, but they're perusable. So depending on the county and where your land is located, sometimes you can have some online resources that will help pinpoint your holes. And then at that point, you can come into the archives and finish your land research. We also have a lot of tax rolls, but the tax rolls are not always arranged by the parcel number that you have on your land right now. So you have to find a way to kind of figure out where your land was at that time. So like some of our earliest tax rolls start with an alphabetical list of who lived on the land. Some of them start with just the section, township, range, lot, and block. And oftentimes if you look at your land description for, let's say it's your property or maybe your relative's property, you should be able to get a full legal description, which will give you the section, township, range, lot, block, if it was platted, if it was part of a community. So like, for instance, I live in the 4th addition to Olympia. I don't have my block and lot memorized, but basically if I look up my description online, I'm in the 4th addition to Olympia, and then I'm in block, let's say I'm in block 10, lot 5. So I need that description to help me do some older land research. And I think that's all I want to give at this moment, because it can get very overwhelming. I'll start saying all kinds of things like, what did she say? Anyway, that'll get you at least the beginning. So usually you want to find a point in time where you know they were. Great things to use are like things like city and county directories. There's sometimes the post office or certain genealogical societies will have from the post office the reverse directories, or they'll have a directory by the older address. like let's say it was a rural route 2, but now it's 205 Pheasant Way. So kind of being able to translate what those things are. Metzger maps are really good. Those are still a published map, and often your local library will have collections of those. And our state library has a great collection statewide of both city and county directories and the Metzger maps.
Connie has a question.
Yes, I have two ancestors that died in Cowles County. They're buried in a local cemetery here in Castle Rock. I have not been able to find any death records in Cowles County. They say that they're not here. Where could I? One was died in 1889. The other one is 1901. Neither one of them records are here. Where do I look?
You might check in with us. I can't remember what Cowles County records we have for that earlier time period, but the other place, I don't know if you've asked your I know the Cowles Museum has some of the older Cowles County records as well. You might want to check in with them.
They wouldn't have a death certificate though, would they?
They might.
Okay.
May be where it ended up. I would say shoot me an email, Connie, and find out if we have those early death records, and if not, check in with the local historical society there, because it's possible they may have gotten them. Sometimes they don't. They're found in other places. That's the best way I can say it. Like, and then people are like, what do I do with these? And they're like, oh, my local historical society. And so they'll bring them in. Sometimes counties used to, a long time ago when there wasn't, you know, the state and local repository as we are now, would sometimes just turn them over for safekeeping to the local historical society because they knew they would keep them safe. So.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome. All right, Jameson, any more questions?
Yeah, we do have a question. Jessica asks, will the state library do interlibrary loans to local libraries?
Yes, they do. They will, and you just need to have a library card at your local library. And usually if you go into your local library, find out if they're still doing interlibrary loan. And if they are, find out, give them as much information as possible. So if you find something from the state library collection that you're interested in, make sure you give your local library as much information as needed so they can do their interlibrary loans. Good question. You know, a lot of people, that's how a lot of people get to look at the old newspaper reels and some of the older like directories and things like that. Some things are still not circulatable even with interlibrary loan, but some of them they will do an agreement between the libraries to make sure it stays safe. Good question.
One quick question. You brought up earlier when you answered my question about property, about the guide created by Olympia. Where can I find that? Is that just on the State Archives website?
So which guide was that?
You said it was the guide to researching property and land.
Oh yes, that's on. It may not be on our website. If you can go to the City of Olympia's historic preservation site, I think they still have that form downloadable. And if they don't, shoot us an email and we can send you a version of it. It's probably an older version. We've been talking about updating that so it's transferable to all cities and all counties. But yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Good question.
Anyways.
Okay. Another question came in the queue. Jay asks, besides polk directories, is there a resource for old telephone books? Looking for Thurston County specifically.
I don't know. I know there were different types of directories that were created. But I've only ever seen the polks around here. You could check in with our Olympia Historical Society to see if there was any other type of, because they both had I think they both had a city and a county directory, or sometimes they'd have like the South Sound directory, which was slightly different. Usually it's for a long time, local libraries would collect all their directories, but I know that sometimes that's changed over time. I'll have to think a little bit more about that one. That's a good stumper for sure. Shoot me an email about that and I'll do a little bit of extra digging and see what I can find.
Speaking of bulk directories, though, we are talking about, and there's no real timeline for this at the moment, but we have a ton of bulk directories from the late 1800s up through 1921 that we're going to be putting into Scribe. So they'll be indexed by volunteers and then put on the digital archives, hopefully in the near future.
That's awesome.
Yes, it is.
Resource. All right.
If we have any Scribe volunteers in here, that will keep you busy for a very, very long time.
All right. If you have anything, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question. Oh, that's a good one. Jameson, do you want to talk about our volunteer program?
Yeah.
The question is, how do you become a volunteer? So we have a couple different things you can do. With COVID, it's been a little different. So most of our volunteer presence has been online with Scribe, and I'll have Jameson talk a little bit more about Scribe.
So I just put a link in the chat, and that is for online volunteers. So you don't actually come into the building. You just do it from home on your own time, however much of it you feel like doing. You could do one record a month, or you could do, we have people who do thousands of records a day. I don't know how they do it. They're amazing, but they do it. Basically, we put images online of records, and you go on there and you look at the record and you fill out a form that tells us what the old document says, and that way we can put it on the digital archives, and if somebody goes and searches for the person on that record, they can find it. So that's where the volunteers are really making the digital archives a great resource, because without them, I don't know what we would do. But they go on there and they index. I was just looking at our numbers earlier this morning. In February alone, we have one volunteer who's indexed 9,300 records, and another one who's done 3,400 records, 3,200 records. They're just amazing, and we've put millions and millions of records online because of this program. Volunteers really are awesome. So I mean, if you can read all documents and type in what they say, then you would be a very valuable person to this program. It's pretty awesome. So that link is in the chat. I'll add a little description under it so that you know what that link is to later.
The other thing I want to say is we just recently put the delayed birth returns up, and I know that some people have been working on it. I think one of the Lindas on this call has been working on it, and we so appreciate your help with that. But we just released a whole bunch of delayed birth returns, and those are getting indexed and getting put up on the digital archives. So we will be doing a series called Fetal Death as well, which is kind of like a birth record. It's a release after 100 years, and so we're working on getting the instructions for that together, and that will be another series that will go up. And it's really helpful for people who are looking for their family.
And if anyone on here has been a Scribe volunteer in the recent past, it appeared that the program ran out of records temporarily, but the records were just being blocked by some glitch. But everything's back online and up and running again. So there's tens of thousands of records ready to be indexed right now.
Then I'll mention about our in-person volunteering. So we're starting to think about having more in-person volunteers now that things with COVID are kind of coming to like I should say, it's not going away, but we're able to put some more protocols in place to make things safe. Here in Olympia, our building is pretty full with both people and things, so we don't have a lot of spacing, and that's part of it. Part of the reason why we love having volunteers in person, but sometimes if we don't have a place to set you, or we have to move you all the time, sometimes that's hard to have to be constantly shifting based on what's going on in the building. But if you are interested in volunteering, just email Jameson and tell him that you're interested in being an in-person volunteer and what area of Washington you're in, and we can see if we can match you up with something if there's something available at the time. Usually we try to think about a project that's working, or sometimes we'll meet with you in person to kind of decide what your interests are to see if we have something that's a good match. For many volunteers, the most helpful thing is to know that that you're comfortable using a computer, and because a lot of this has to do with indexing. So indexing helps people get to the records a lot quicker. But we do also have some things where we have people just help refolder and rebox items that need some special attention. So, and we really appreciate those volunteers. We've missed having them. It's been 2 years since we've had volunteers in person, so we've missed having them. Any other questions? Anything else you're working on that you're like, I need to know where to go for this thing? This is your opportunity to ask. Don't let the recording thing shy away from asking the questions. Plus, this helps for other people. I think we've got a lot of feedback that this helps other people with doing their research. So if you're looking for something, I'll bet you there's someone else who's looking for the same thing you're looking for. Yeah, go ahead,
Go ahead,
Connie.
Connie.
I don't have a question, but I do want to tell you how much I appreciate the resource list you gave us last week at our meeting. I'm really getting into it. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's a great plug. That's a great plug. So I did a webinar for Connie's group, the Lower Columbia Genealogical Society, and did a little presentation, did a little Q&A. So if you're ever interested in having someone do a presentation for your group, I think out of this particular thing, I've been asked to come and do a similar type session with a couple other groups. And I'm not the only speaker. So if you don't like my speaking style, there's definitely other people who can speak here at the archives, and they can do presentations for you. So if you're interested, you can get in contact with us, and it doesn't matter where you are in the state. We do have people who do that. At any point, we have our branches and different people who do outreach. So, and we do love doing outreach. So contact us and let us know what we can do. I did see another question pop up there, Jameson, but I missed it.
We had like 3 pop up very quickly. So,
Okay.
well, first off, Linda T has complimented your speaking style because it is perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Elsie asked, do we need to make an appointment to visit the Olympia archives?
Yes, at this moment, we are still just taking appointments, but they're Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And we don't break for lunch. So we've got, several days a week we can do appointments. Just the other day, actually, we had 7 people in the research room, which is pretty full. We try to keep everybody still kind of socially distant and make sure we've got enough room for the copiers. So we are seeing our numbers increase. So if you are coming, we recommend highly that you contact us ahead of time via email. And I would always say like maybe about a week before you're coming, just because there could be records that you would be interested in that may not be on our at our building on site. We may have to order them from another site which is close and local, but we get those shipments twice a week. So to make sure we have everything you'd like to review while you're here, give us a call about a week in advance. If you know it's old enough, or if you've been talking with me and you're like, oh yes, this is going to be here, you're looking at territorial records, that stuff's going to be here, then just go ahead and give us a couple days notice so we can make sure that we've got room for you, because that's the other thing. People are contacting us and making appointments. I think we will go back to walk-ins at some point, but we still haven't gotten there yet. That's a good question. And you can just shoot us an email or give us a call.
Okay, Linda has asked an interesting question, and I just clicked out of it, so one sec. Okay, so Linda says, I was reading old newspapers and came across an article about a Mamie Astwick Norris, married to James Cochran Norris. In 1920, she was incarcerated at Eastern State Hospital at age 55. She disappears after that, no death record. So the question is, for those incarcerated, where do we locate death records for them? She's not the only one.
So it could be that they left the state. And so sometimes that's hard, especially that's where the censuses can be helpful. If they show up on one census and then a few years later they show up on another, The other possibility, and I cannot believe how often this happens as a research archivist, but people actually change their names. And it's not at all similar to their regular name. Sometimes they completely reinvent themselves. So I know my aunt, I think I told this story before, but my aunt was looking for a relative of ours, which she called the rascal Roscoe, because she could not find him. Like, he was just, she would find him here and there, or just little tidbits or hints that he might have been there, but could never actually nail down where he died. And it took her, I want to say, like 5 years to finally track him down. Thankfully, with more online records, that's what's helpful. But sometimes those records you're looking for that person may just be in this tiny little place that you have to go to. But if you can find out where the person was and narrow what the gap was, like, if that can be helpful. The other thing is, if she was in Eastern Washington, there's a good probability that she went into Idaho or in Oregon, so that could be another place to look. The other thing is to see what would next of kin, where that might have been. And then the other piece of it is maybe contact us and see if we have a record of her, like look for a record of her trial, the case file of her trial, or find out if she spent any time in Walla Walla as well. This could be good things. But if you want to shoot me an email, I'll give you a list of some ideas of some places to check to find her. That sounds like a fascinating story.
Here's another interesting one. Not that any questions are not interesting, but this one caught my eye. John says, I have a relative who is an employee in Olympia at LNI and was shot on the job in the 1930s. Would you have employee records from that time?
We don't typically hold employee records, but we sometimes will have like an employee directory, and those, or an organizational chart, which will list the person and their position. So John, if you would shoot us an email, maybe I can take a look and see what we can find for that. And I want to say, I think for our LNI records, we do have some employee rosters. I just don't remember the time frames. And if you shoot an email to us, just put attention Tracy.
Okay, let's see. John also asked if we're still in need of volunteers canvassing cemeteries. Yeah, there are plenty of cemeteries out there that we don't have a collection for, a title for. I mean, probably most of them. We particularly have a whole lot of cemeteries from Eastern Washington, because we had a volunteer who was out there for, I don't even know how long, like 12 years, going through all the cemeteries, doing readings and sending those to us. But we also have a lot in King County and Grays Harbor County. But I'm sure we have plenty still, even in those areas and all over the state, that still are not in our collection. If you're interested in doing something like that, I can send you an Excel sheet that shows you the information that we collect and how we denote the info. That makes it very easy to just plug everything in and send it to us, and we can get it online quickly. So yeah, I'll put my email address in here again. You can contact me about that as well. Let's see. Linda T says, I was looking for a death certificate for a project I'm doing for our museum. Couldn't find it, and for some reason I tried her maiden name. She was there. There is a button at the bottom to send corrections, so I did that.
Okay. Yes, and I wanted to say, if you are using the digital archives and you come across something that's not indexed correctly, as you know, we do rely heavily on our volunteers, and we totally we appreciate their work. But sometimes, I mean, myself included, sometimes you're typing and you you put the wrong letter in or something like that. And if you see something like that, there is a way on the digital archives to send us a note that says, that requests a correction. Now, I will say that for us to correct things, it has to be correct on the document itself. If the document itself is incorrect, we cannot do anything about the correction. But you can often add a little note for other researchers at the bottom. There's a way to add a comment that says you can put any additional information you'd like researchers to see when they come across that record.
I just remembered I missed a question back up here. Let's see. Betty asked a question about death certificates. You said death certificates won't be available until 100 years after death. Does that apply to a direct relative? Could they see a death certificate at the courthouse sooner than 100 years?
So so it's birth that's available after 100 years, and death is available after 25. Hopefully
So
that
could
clears that up.
does that apply to a direct relative? Could they see a death certificate at the courthouse sooner than 25 years?
I think, yes, there's a way for you to contact the local health district to be able to see a death record. And I do believe there's some paperwork you have to fill out. I don't know a lot about that, but I know the Department of Health has kind of a question and answer, frequently asked questions on their webpage. And um, Jameson, I don't know if you can find that quickly or not, but it's doh.wa.gov. And if you look under certificates and licenses, and then under birth, death, whatever, there's actually a list. There's actually a listing of FAQs for the vital records. And maybe you can add that link to this webinar.
Tell me the
And if
navigation on that again. DOH website. And then
.wa. Yeah,
right, I got
DOH.
that.
Okay, and then go to, there should be on the bar, there should be like a certificates, licenses
Okay, I see that.
listing. And then if you hover over that, you'll see the death, birth, divorce, marriage.
No, that's not one of the options.
If you click on the license and certificates, it doesn't pop up next. Maybe they switched their web. I did notice their website looked different the other day.
Okay, I got it. You have to actually you have to click on it and go to the
Yes. Yes.
page. Okay.
So if you send them, yeah. There's a link to the vital records, and then within that is an FAQ for access. It looks like we're coming up on 5 on the hour. I probably have enough to do maybe one more question.
Linda T, on that where you said you searched for her maiden name for whatever reason and it happened to pop up. That's actually a really good research tip, especially on the digital archives, because a lot of volunteers, and I think DOH even does this sometimes too, when they see a maiden name listed as if it's kind of their middle name, they will enter that as part of the last name. So even though that wasn't their legal last name at the time of the recording, that's how it was put down by whoever indexed the record. So sometimes that's how you will find it. And our search function is not as advanced as something like Google, because if you put in, let's say you type in Murphy, it's not going to pop up. If somebody was indexed as Mills Murphy, they're not going to pop up as Murphy. It just won't show up in the results. So searching for maiden names is always a good thing on the digital archives.
Yeah. And then sometimes to broaden those searches to just use maybe first initial or first name, last initial. That, I mean, anything you can do to simplify it, because sometimes if it is a typo, it's not going to come up. It's very exacting. It's not as keyword searchable unless you're using keyword. It's not. The name is not keyword searchable. It's basically pulling up exactly that name, as or
Yeah,
at least
so
let's say it's Wellesley and it's WELL something, that it'll pull up anything with WELL. Yeah. So
yeah, so that's also a good tip for searching for someone who might have a last name that's difficult to spell or pronounce, especially if it's from a record that you suspect was from back in the where everything was written in cursive by someone with sloppy handwriting. Let's say you're looking for someone whose last name was Wojciechowski or something like that. That could be very difficult to read and spell if it's written poorly. So you can guess at misspellings of it and see if something pops up.
yeah, and I will say sometimes what we recommend for our volunteers, if you can't read it, just put the first letter down or something like that. Don't just put nothing. So sometimes if you'll see just the last letter, it could be the volunteer was like, yeah, I really can't make that out beyond a shadow of a doubt. So we'd rather have something be there than have it terribly misspelled. So yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I'll be here next month answering those questions. Hopefully you'll have some things. I will try to talk about, I was trying to decide what I should talk about. Maybe I should talk a little bit more about land land research.
I think that's a good idea.
I'll talk a little bit more about land. And then, yeah. And then in the meantime, you can shoot me an email and let me know if you have any questions, and I'll try to help as best I can. All right. Thank you, everyone.